You know what's unsettling to think about right now? As you're watching this video, Chris Watts is sitting alone in a prison cell in Wisconsin. Concrete walls, steel bars, no freedom. And just recently, he received a message. Not from a family member, not from a journalist, not from a curious stranger obsessed with true crime. This message came from one of the most feared prison organizations in America, the Arian Brotherhood. December 15th. Inside Dodge Correctional Institution, a guard is doing what he's done hundreds of times before, a routine mail inspection. Letters, legal documents, magazines. Nothing unusual, until one envelope makes him pause. It's addressed to inmate number 17529, Chris Watts. But something is wrong. The return address doesn't exist. No sender. No institution. No name that can be traced. And that's when the guard notices it. Drawn quietly in the corner of the envelope, small, deliberate, unmistakable, 3 leaves. A shamrock. To most people, it might look harmless, decorative, meaningless. But to any correctional officer in America, it means one thing. The Arian Brotherhood. And when they reach out to someone, it's never by accident. They don't write letters for no reason. They don't make contact unless there's a purpose. They always want something. So the question becomes, what could they possibly want from Chris Watts? But before I tell you what was inside that letter, there's something you need to understand, something the media rarely talks about. Because Chris Watts, the man who annihilated his family in 2018, has become something very different behind bars. Something unexpected. Something dangerous. Something that caught the attention of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the U.S. prison system. And what you're about to hear may completely change where you thought this story was headed. To understand how we got here, we have to go back. Back to August 2018. Back to the moment Chris Watts first walked through prison doors. Because there's a secret that's been hidden for more than 6 years. And it begins with his first 3 days inside. Before we continue, let's take a moment to remember Shanann, her 2 daughters, and her unborn son, Nico. Dear God, as we remember Shanann, her children, and baby Nico, may their souls rest in peace. Lord, protect our families from every evil. If you remember them, type amen in the comments. And let us know where you're watching from. This is True Crime Mysteries. August 21st, 3:47 a.m. Most of the world is asleep. But at a maximum security prison, a transport van slowly pulls into the intake area. Inside that van is Chris Watts. You might be wondering, why bring him in at night? Why not during the day? The answer is simple. Protection. When someone like Chris Watts enters the prison system, everyone already knows who he is. Everyone knows what he did. And in prison, people who hurt women and children don't just sit at the bottom of the hierarchy. They fall beneath it. That's why intake happens while most inmates are locked in their cells. Fewer eyes, less risk. But safer doesn't mean safe. The intake process takes hours. They photograph him. They fingerprint him. They strip away his identity and replace it with a number. He's asked hundreds of questions: medical history, mental health, enemies, affiliations, threats. And then comes the most critical decision of all. Where do they put him? General population is out of the question. Because within 6 hours of arriving at his first facility, Chris Watts received threats. Not 1, not 5, not 10, 47. 47 separate threats in less than 6 hours. Some came through other inmates. Some were shouted across hallways. Some were passed quietly by guards who looked the other way. Every single one carried the same message. If Chris Watts ever left protective custody, he wouldn't survive a day. But here's what the media never reported. One of those threats was different. It came at 2 a.m. Chris Watts was alone in a temporary holding cell, wide awake, staring at concrete, listening to every sound. And then he heard it. A faint noise. Paper sliding across the floor. Something had been pushed under his cell door. He bends down and picks it up. 3 words are written on the paper. We know everything. That's it. No signature. No explanation. Just 3 words. But it wasn't the words themselves that made Chris Watts' blood run cold. It was what was drawn beneath them. A small symbol. Simple. Intentional. A shamrock. 3 leaves. Now, if you don't know anything about prison politics, that symbol might not mean much to you. It might look harmless. Almost meaningless. But if you're an inmate, if you're a guard, if you've spent any real time inside the system, you know exactly what it means. That symbol belongs to the Arian Brotherhood. And here's the rule everyone inside understands. They don't contact someone unless there's a reason. They don't warn people. They don't introduce themselves. They make contact only when they want something. So here's what you need to understand. From day one, really from hour 6, the Brotherhood had their eyes on Chris Watts. Watching him, tracking him, studying him. But why? What could one of the most powerful and violent prison organizations in America possibly want from a man like Chris Watts? To answer that, we need to talk about what happened next, about where they put him, and about how Chris Watts spent the next 6 years behind bars. Because he didn't just sit in his cell feeling sorry for himself. He was learning, studying, changing, becoming something nobody expected. And that transformation is exactly what caught their attention. Let me ask you something. What do you think protective custody really means? Most people hear that term and think it sounds safe. Like the prison is doing everything they can to protect someone. And technically, that's true. Chris Watts is being protected from inmates who want to hurt him. And there are many. But here's what protective custody actually looks like. 23 hours a day in a cell. Let me say that again. 23 hours. Every single day. The cell itself is tiny, about 8 feet by 10 feet. That's smaller than most people's bathrooms. Inside that space, there's a bed, a toilet, a sink, and almost nothing else. He gets 1 hour a day for recreation. But even that isn't what you might imagine. He's alone. No conversations. No basketball games. No lifting weights. None of the things movies show you about prison life. He walks in a small yard, by himself, with guards watching. Then he goes right back into that cell. Every day. For the rest of his life. Now imagine that. Imagine spending 23 hours a day in a space the size of a parking spot. No stimulation. No human contact. Nothing to distract you. Just you. And your thoughts. For most people, that would break them. Psychologically, prolonged isolation is one of the hardest things a human being can endure. There are studies on this. Long-term isolation causes depression, anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations. Some inmates lose their grip on reality entirely. But Chris Watts didn't. He adapted. And that's where this story takes a deeply disturbing turn. June 2019. Less than a year after entering the prison system, a prison education counselor files a report. It's not routine. It's flagged as unusual. Why? Because Chris Watts has been requesting law books. Now, inmates requesting books isn't strange. A lot of people in prison try to educate themselves. They read. They study. They look for ways to pass the time. But Chris Watts wasn't requesting just any books. He wanted specific ones. Books on criminal procedure, constitutional law, prison litigation, how the legal system actually works. And he wasn't just skimming them. He was studying, taking notes, highlighting passages, breaking down legal arguments, really diving into the material. Within 8 months, Chris Watts filed 14 grievances against the prison system. 14. He challenged his conditions, his treatment, his classification. He argued that certain prison policies violated his constitutional rights. And he didn't do it emotionally. He did it legally, using proper terminology, citing case law, making structured arguments. Now here's the part that matters. 13 of those grievances were dismissed. The prison system reviewed them and said no, they didn't have merit. But one of them worked. Chris Watts won. Not a huge victory. Not anything dramatic. Just a small change to his conditions. But in prison, that's everything. Because it proved something. It proved that Chris Watts wasn't just another helpless inmate sitting alone in a cell. He was learning how to fight the system. And someone was watching. Chris Watts was smart. Not in a flashy way. Not in a way that draws attention. But smart enough to navigate the system. Smart enough to understand how prison rules work, how legal procedures overlap, and more importantly, where the cracks are. And when someone can find those cracks and exploit them, especially inside a maximum security prison, they become valuable. Very valuable. Let me explain something most people don't realize. In maximum security prisons, there is an economy. But it's not like the economy you and I know. It's not really about money. Money matters, sure, but it's not the main thing. The real economy in prison is built on currency. And that currency comes in 3 forms. Information, protection, power. Some inmates control drugs. That's currency. Some have connections on the outside. People who can move money, intimidate witnesses, or smuggle items in. That's currency. Some inmates have muscle. They can hurt people. They can enforce rules. That's currency too. But there's another type of currency that almost no one outside the system thinks about. Legal knowledge. There are thousands of inmates trying to appeal their cases, trying to challenge sentences, trying to improve their living conditions. But most of them don't know how. They don't understand legal language. They can't write a proper motion. They don't know how to cite case law or find procedural errors. So they need help. And if you're someone who can provide that help, if you can explain the system, draft paperwork, and find loopholes, you become extremely valuable. By 2020, Chris Watts was doing something that shocked prison officials. He wasn't just studying law anymore. He was helping other inmates with their legal cases, writing motions, reviewing case files, identifying procedural mistakes, finding technical errors that lawyers had missed. And he wasn't bad at it. He was good, really good. 3 inmates Chris Watts assisted received sentencing reductions. Not massive reductions, but enough to matter. Enough to change release dates. Enough to turn heads. 2 more inmates won appeals for improved conditions, better cells, better food access, more recreation time. Inside prison, those kinds of wins spread fast. Word travels, and people notice. December 15th. We're back where this story began. A guard is doing routine mail screening. Every single piece of mail entering a prison is inspected. They're looking for contraband, hidden messages, gang communication, anything that violates protocol. This letter stands out immediately, not because of what's written on it, but because of what's drawn on it. That same symbol, the 3-leaf shamrock. The guard doesn't even open the envelope. He doesn't hesitate. He takes it straight to the warden's office. That's protocol. Any suspected gang communication goes straight to the top. Now, I can't show you what's actually inside that letter. It's evidence in an ongoing investigation, and prison officials are not releasing it to the public. But I can tell you what multiple sources say it contains. And honestly, it's not what anyone expected. The letter does not threaten Chris Watts. There's no violence implied, no intimidation, no ultimatums. Instead, it makes an offer. Protection, full protection, inside Dodge Correctional Institution, and any other facility Chris Watts might ever be transferred to. No more protective custody. No more 23 hours a day in a tiny cell. Access to general population. Better conditions. Better food. More phone privileges. More visitation. Everything an inmate could possibly want. But there's always a price. The Arian Brotherhood wants Chris Watts to become their legal consultant. Officially, they want him to review cases for their members. Draft motions. File appeals. Find legal loopholes. Anything that could lead to reduced sentences, overturned convictions, or improved conditions. They want him to be their lawyer, from inside prison. Now let me explain why this is an incredibly dangerous position for Chris Watts. If he accepts this offer, he immediately becomes a target. The Arian Brotherhood has enemies. A lot of enemies. Rival organizations that compete for power, influence, and control inside the prison system. And those groups do not tolerate anyone who helps the Brotherhood. If Chris Watts starts working for them, his life expectancy drops fast. We're talking months, maybe weeks, before someone from a rival group tries to hurt him. But here's the other side of that coin. If he refuses the offer, the Brotherhood doesn't just walk away. They don't say, no problem. And they definitely don't forget. They don't work like that. When the Arian Brotherhood makes someone an offer and that person says no, there are consequences. Bad consequences. In prison, inmates who turn down recruitment offers usually face one of 2 outcomes. Either they're severely hurt, or they don't survive at all. There is no neutral position. No safe middle ground. The moment that letter was sent, Chris Watts stopped being just another inmate serving a sentence. He became a piece on a chessboard. And now, he has to choose a side. But here's where this gets even more complicated. Because there's something the Brotherhood might not know about. Or maybe they do know, and that's exactly why they chose this specific moment to make contact. Chris Watts has been receiving other offers. Not from inmates. Not from gangs. From real law firms on the outside. Legitimate firms. These are firms that specialize in criminal defense, wrongful convictions, sentence reductions, and uncovering legal errors buried deep in case files. And they want to hire Chris Watts. Not as a lawyer, but as a paralegal consultant. From prison. And believe it or not, this is a real thing. Prisons have monitored work programs where inmates can legally assist outside organizations. It's regulated, it's supervised, and it gives inmates something most of them never get: purpose, skills, a reason to wake up that isn't just survival. One of these law firms has reached out to Chris Watts 3 times in the past year. They want his help reviewing case files, looking for procedural mistakes, identifying legal problems their attorneys might have missed. It's legitimate work. It's legal. And for Chris Watts, it could mean more than just passing time. It could give his life structure, meaning, maybe even a path towards something that resembles redemption. And here's the detail that changes everything. 3 days before the Arian Brotherhood's letter arrived, Chris Watts told his attorney that he was seriously considering accepting one of these offers. 3 days. That timing is not random. It's not coincidence. They knew. They always know. Someone inside the prison, or someone with access to the prison, told them what was happening. They knew Chris Watts was about to take a legitimate job, about to establish himself in a way that didn't involve them. And they couldn't allow that. So they sent their letter, their offer, their warning, a message that said, without actually saying it, you're either with us, or you're against us. Now Chris Watts is facing an impossible choice: accept the Brotherhood's protection and tie himself permanently to one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in America. Spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, knowing rival gangs will be waiting for an opportunity. Or refuse the offer, and hope that a legitimate opportunity saves him before the Brotherhood decides to make him pay for that rejection. But there's a third option, one almost nobody is talking about, and it might be the most dangerous option of all. What if Chris Watts doesn't choose either side? What if there's someone else who wants him to make a very different choice? Here's what most people don't realize. Chris Watts isn't just dealing with a prison gang. He's not just weighing a decision between criminal protection and legitimate work. There are other players involved. Players that operate far above the level of prison politics. I'm talking about the federal government. January 2024. That's 10 months before the Arian Brotherhood sent their letter to Chris Watts. And that's where this story takes another turn. January 2024. That's when the FBI opens an investigation. Specifically, the Domestic Terrorism Task Force. Now, you might be wondering, what does domestic terrorism have to do with prison gangs? The answer is everything. Organizations like the Arian Brotherhood are no longer just prison gangs. They've evolved. They have networks on the outside. They're connected to organized crime, drug trafficking, extortion, violence that reaches far beyond prison walls. In recent years, federal authorities have become increasingly concerned about prison radicalization, how extremist groups recruit inside prisons, how they spread ideology, and how they coordinate criminal activity between inmates and people on the outside. From the FBI's perspective, prisons aren't just holding facilities anymore. They're recruitment hubs, and the FBI wants to understand these networks. More than that, they want to dismantle them. But to do that, they need information. They need someone on the inside, someone who sees how these groups operate day to day, how messages are passed, how power is enforced, how alliances are formed. And that's where Chris Watts comes in. Over the course of 6 years in prison, Chris Watts has been keeping notes. Not casual notes, detailed notes. Notes about threats he's received, about gang activity he's witnessed, about conversations he's overheard, information about the structure, behavior, and internal rules of multiple prison organizations. Originally, he wasn't doing this to help law enforcement. He was doing it for self-protection, legal protection. If something happened to him, if he was attacked, injured, or killed, he wanted documentation. Proof that he'd been threatened. Proof that he'd reported it. Proof that prison officials were aware of the danger. But federal investigators see something else in those notes. They believe that Chris Watts' documentation could be incredibly valuable, not just against the Arian Brotherhood, but against multiple gang networks operating inside and outside the prison system. From their perspective, this isn't about Chris Watts as a person. It's about what he knows. March 2024. Without warning, without explanation, Chris Watts is pulled from his cell. No routine escort, no scheduled appointment. He's taken to an administrative office. And when he walks in, he sees 2 people he's never seen before. They're not prison officials. They're wearing suits. They have badges, federal agents, and they have a proposal for Chris Watts.